what he told me next was what really blew me away and brought me to tears. He said, my dad gave me his whole investment retirement money,
Whoa.
and he lost 100% of his father's retirement money. Do you have interest in investing? Some people don't. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't be investing. You must be investing to build your wealth over time. So if you say, no, I don't have interest, then you just buy a mutual fund.
To everyone watching this, it's so important. That's a very, very good take that you have to do your own research. A lot of people lose money just by buying off tips, what they see on Twitter, what they hear from people around them. And it's so easy to be envious when you see your friend making money, but really there's no secret to grow wealth. It's something that you build and you take the time to be good at it as well, because if it was so easy, then we all would be billionaires as well.
Exactly. Would you like to hear number two, the second most common mistake that people make?
Let's do this.
That is, they fail to properly assess and manage risk. Now, I want to tell you a story about one of my guests. His name's Jeremy Newsom. Jeremy's in Canada. He was a young guy. He got fascinated with stock market, and he asked his dad, hey, Dad, can you give me a little bit of money? I want to trade in the stock market. He bought a particular stock. It went up, and he made good money. He cashed out. He gave his dad back some money, the money that he had given him, and then he enjoyed that he had a couple $1,000s that he made. So he was 20-something years old. So he went back in, and he started studying the market a little bit more, and he got interested in nickel. And so he decided that he was going to buy nickel. So he went to his dad and said, hey, Dad, let's do it again. Can I get some money? He said, let's do it. So his dad gave him some money, and then he went and bought nickel. And as he told me in the interview, he bought nickel 15 minutes before its peak.
Wow.
And as he said, he didn't have any risk management in mind at all. He didn't think that it would even go down. So he had no plan. But to make matters worse, he didn't actually buy nickel. He bought a derivative instrument on nickel, which basically means when you buy a derivative instrument, it can go to zero. You know, if nickel went down by 50%, you'd still have 50% of your money in nickel. But with the derivative instrument, that 50% fall could mean you lose everything. And that's exactly what he lost on his second trade of his life. Now, you remember where he got his money?
Who's that?
So it turns out what he told me next was what really blew me away and brought me to tears. He said, my dad gave me his whole investment retirement.
Whoa.
And he lost 100% of his father's retirement money. So when we're talking about properly assessing and managing risk, it's a real serious thing. And I want to make sure that everybody listening really takes it seriously. So let's talk about it for just a minute. Remember I told you about getting a piece of paper and drawing a line down the middle. On the other side of the line, we put return on one side. Now let's put risk. What could go wrong? I want to tell you a story, Marvin, of something that I've really kind of learned over the years. I have one of my businesses that I invest in is a business that I started with my best friend Dale. It's called Coffee Works, and it's in Thailand. We have about 100 employees, and it's a growing business.
Oh.
It's a wholesale coffee roaster. Dale runs the business, and I run the financial aspect with him and support him in every way. But we had an opportunity to expand to Vietnam from Thailand, and we were very interested, and we thought from a bigger picture, it would be great to have a platform across all of Asia for our business. And so we agreed that Dale would do the research to try to figure it out. He went to Vietnam, met with the key players. It was a good opportunity to get a foothold into Vietnam by partnering with a global company. But when he came back, we decided that he would make a presentation. He had worked for a while on it, and he presented what he thought was the upside. He presented what the opportunity was, what market share he thought we would get, and then we went through all of that. And at the end of that discussion, rather than fight or discuss or debate, we went for a nice Chinese dinner. And then we had agreed that the next week we would meet again. And that next week we met again, where Dale presented about the risks. And when he went through all the risks of it, it became very obvious to us that the risks were too high for the reward that we had seen. But the key lesson of this is separate the research that you do on return from the research that you do on risk. If you literally separate those two things, it also takes the emotion out of it. And so that's really my advice when it comes to, trying to assess risk. The other thing about managing risk is, whenever you're making an investment, I think You explained it in the podcast interview that we did about, being careful, being diversified and all that. And I think that that's a second part, which is managing the risk. If you're in an investment that's starting to go down and you're worried about it, nothing wrong with selling half of it. In fact, that's what you did, right? In your store, you sold a portion of it. Nothing wrong with that. You could sell it all or you could sell a bit, but that's about managing risk.
Let's assume it's additional money that they don't plan to touch for the long term. It's not a derivative. They're buying the real stock. And a lot of people get disappointed when they're so optimistic about it, but it goes the other direction. Assuming nothing changes in the company, it just really doesn't move or it just keeps going down. What would you do if you were in their shoes, seeing a fundamentally sound company not move at all?
I did a study when I was working on my PhD, and I gave a speech in the Philippines, and I talked to young people about owning an ETF or a passive fund. But I realized it's really bad advice for people in the Philippines because there really aren't a lot of options. It's mainly active funds, and the active funds can be very expensive also. The fees. And a lot of young people didn't necessarily at that time have access to markets around the world. So I thought I could tell them, hey, you got to learn how to pick stocks in the Philippines because you don't have an ETF that's a passive ETF. But that's also bad advice. I got 2,000 students in front of me. Most of them are never going to do research on stocks. So that's not a good advice either. So I went back to my university and I took a long walk and I tried to think this through. And I asked myself the question, what if we put a stop loss? And let's say we randomly selected stocks in the Philippines. So I did a study where I randomly selected stocks in the Philippines, and then I built portfolios randomly. And then I looked at all of those portfolios. I built 1,000 portfolios to look at kind of alternate histories of what could have happened. And you see like a fanning out of potential outcomes, some really bad outcomes and some really great outcomes just by the luck of the draw. But what I did is I said, what if I was to add a 20% stop loss and just say, because I knew that my students didn't know anything about picking stocks and they had randomly picked it. So if that stock goes down by 20%, just sell it, hold cash and wait until the end of the year and then randomly select 10 new stocks. I thought it's many people aren't going to manage their money that way, but I think it's a good way to understand the benefit of a stop loss. And what I found was that fan diagram went like this. I'm showing on the video, I'm showing that the bottom of that went up. Basically, the worst case scenarios got a lot better. And in fact, you would have had a much higher chance of getting returns. So if you're not that super experienced and you're starting to invest in individual stocks, my suggestion is put a stop loss in. You buy it at 100 and say, if it gets to 80, I'm just going to sell because I don't know what to do, but I can't afford to ride it down to 50 to 40 to 30 to 20. And I'm not like a professional analyst where I'm going to call the company and talk to them and talk to all the channels. Everything's okay. So that would be one piece of advice. It works for some people. It doesn't work for others.
Assuming that the company stays the same, nothing wrong with it. Would you recommend that they add more to that position, assuming that it's a good one, or just literally cut everything and live to fight another day?
This is the hardest question of all for all of us. It's fun to buy a stock, but it's to know what to do when it starts to fall. And the truth is, Marvin, there is no correct answer here. You really have to go with your gut. You have to have a plan. The key thing is to have a plan beforehand. Now, also when you're careful about what I talked about, managing risk, about building your position size, it's good also to go into something slowly so that if it does start to come down, you've got some ammunition to go in and buy a little bit more. There's nothing wrong with that. Most of my clients throughout my 30 years in institutional research and institutional investment, they're never going to use a stop loss. They're always going to say, I think this business is still good, therefore I'm going to get in. Now, the one thing that I would say, I use a stop loss for my portfolios, but the thing that I do is that I also reevaluate every stock in the market, and I'm talking about markets globally. I reevaluate every stock in the market relative to the others every 3 months. So if I did a stop loss, I bought it at 100, it went to 80, and then it went down to 60, I may buy it again. Maybe I just bought it at the wrong time. It's a good investment, it's good value, but let's just say that people are taking money out of the Philippines right now, and so therefore the share price is crashing, not because of valuation or anything else. And I think that's where, understanding flow of funds, understanding technicals is important. And that's part of the momentum in FVMR. We got to understand what's happening with momentum. you know, we have a saying in English about, you know, don't try to catch a falling knife, right? If it's falling, let it fall.
Number 3, what's a third way for people to lose money? Because from what you're telling me, it's making me a bit emotional. So what's number 3?
Exactly. So number 3 is that people are driven by emotion or flawed thinking. And I want to, you know, bring these two things together. First is emotion, where we just get excited. And this is where we only look at the upside. We don't look at the risk. We don't do our research. We just get so excited. And then the flawed thinking is that we're not analyzing things properly. And, you know, maybe we're expecting a really high return or not. And so basically what I've learned is that you've got to control your emotion. And there's a great book on this. I think I've got it up on my wall here. And I don't see it, but it's in my office somewhere. It's called Your Money in Your Brain. And Your Money in Your Brain by Jason Zweig. And basically what that taught me is that investing is really a physical contact sport. What he's shown through functional MRI in our brain is that when a stock starts going up, we have physical changes that are happening in our brains and reactions that can also lead into our bodies. And so if you've ever had that feeling like you've done something wrong and you start sweating, like, whoa, that's an example of how it can be very, you know, and when something starts crashing, there's all kinds of emotion. Now, the one thing I would say from my experience about talking to people about their worst investment ever is there are a ton of scammers. A ton of scammers. I know in the Philippines there's a lot, and my good friend Salvi, she's a scam buster out there trying to keep people's awareness of scams. There's a ton of scams, and if it's too good to be true, it's probably a scam. And so what I try to encourage people to do is to try to find opposing views. A lot of times we just get excited and then we just go and do it. No, stop, talk to people, talk with a knowledgeable person, someone who's objective, and tell them what you're thinking of doing, and then shut up and listen. Trust is the glue of business, and it's the glue of investing. You know, we have so much trust that's going on in business. You know, when you're doing business and you're giving credit terms and you're getting credit terms, that's just trust. Employees are working for 30 days out of the month, trusting that they're going to get paid at the end. There's trust involved. It's the glue of business and the glue of investing. And it just takes time to develop. So don't rush into something with someone until you feel like you've got some level of trust.